Hello, EduMagicians. Welcome to the EduMagic Podcast with your host, Dr. Sam Fessich. Dr. Sam is a professor of education, author of EduMagic, and a pumpkin spice latte fan. This podcast is designed for pre-service teachers. Remember, friends, teaching doesn't begin at graduation, but during that first class at 8 a.m. Let's get this party started.
I'm Matt Miller of the Ditch That Textbook podcast, a proud member of the Education Podcast Network, just like the show you're listening to right now. The opinions expressed are those of the individual hosts. Make sure you check out all the other great educational podcasts at edupodcastnetwork.com.
Hello, EduMagicians, and welcome back to another episode of the EduMagic Podcast. My name is Dr. Sam Fessich, and today I have with me Diane Romo, and we were able to connect over on the Teach Your Heart Out conference this summer, and it was just amazing. So, Diane, I would love to have you introduce yourself and share a little bit about your teaching story. And before you begin, I just love to hear everybody's teaching stories, because I think sometimes when future teachers, see where people currently are in their role in education, it's like hard to imagine what were they doing whenever they were a college student. So it's just so much fun to hear people's stories and where their journeys have taken them and led them in education. So I would love to hear yours, Diane.
Okay, well, I am so excited to be here. Thank you for having me. So I taught first grade for 30 years, and 30 years in the same building, in the same district, in first grade, which is so crazy because that seems very unusual. To not get moved around and to not be placed in other grades. There were years when I would go in and volunteer. Mm-hmm. To move to other grades, and then I was told, you know what, we really need you where you're at, so please stay there. And so it wasn't for lack of I didn't want to go, but that was where I was needed, so that was where I stayed. I just retired in June, and I did not retire because I didn't like it anymore, but I retired to pursue other things. I wanted to help teachers and students in other ways now, presenting professional development. I've been writing some books for young readers. I create resources for elementary classrooms, and I wanted to spend a little more time on that. And I'd like to get involved more in mentoring new teachers.
Nice.
I do have to say, as far as like where you come from and where you end up. So I grew up in a town that was very middle class and not very diverse. And when it was time for me to do my student teaching, the college had, one of the rules was that you had to do one of your student teaching sessions in an inner city school. And so that was where, I ended up doing my student teaching in an inner city setting, and it changed my life. I ended up getting a job where I student taught. And I'm telling you, I would not be the person I am today had I not taught in the district I taught in, because then I was faced with diversity in so many different ways. And I did not grow up with that. And I would not have had the empathy and the understanding of people and differences. And I was able to pass that along to my children, my own children. And, I had the most amazing cooperating teacher that taught me to show up every day for my students. And that was the most important thing, to show up every day. And I continued to do that throughout my career. And I hope to be able to pass that along to new teachers as well. Your students need you no matter what their background, no matter where they're coming from, academically, socially, physically. And every child needs you in some way. And you just need to show up and be there for them.
Diane, I think you just named the title of this episode. It's going to be Show Up. That's just such a great message that resonates. And it resonates across those grade levels and subject areas because we're impacting students, whether they're our little learners all the way up through our adult learners. And we just have to show up. Show up for your students. That is such a powerful statement.
Yes. And, it's so true. And regardless of, if you feel, and we're going to talk about family engagement and family involvement, but whether you think that child has a huge family following behind them or not, they still need you in ways that you may not even understand.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Oh, this is good. This is going to be a good conversation, Diane.
Oh, good.
So you shared about earlier about, we're going to talk about working with families. And did this passion for working with families kind of start whenever you were working as a new teacher, or is this something that just started to develop throughout your career?
Well, you know what? It started from the very beginning, and it started again. I go back to that amazing cooperating teacher that taught me everybody has a story, and every family, no matter what their story is there for their child.
Mm-hmm.
You don't know their story, so you don't know why their presence may not look just like the family, that child sitting next to this child. The presence of their family may appear very different. You don't know why that is, but that doesn't mean both families don't love that child and want the best for their child.
Right.
So, it started from the very beginning, and I learned that families play a key role in supporting the learning and development of the students. And once you realize that and you show those families that you believe in them and you support them as much as you need them to support you, it's a cakewalk. It really is.
I like that. So your passion, started to grow, and you mentioned earlier the importance of mentoring and raising up those new teachers, the beginning year teachers. What advice do you have for them when they start working with families? Because I think oftentimes we can think of it as dealing with families. There's a big difference between working with and dealing with. And I'm seeing lots of things on social saying families as partners in education. And with COVID, families were able to get a little sneak peek, a little window into our classrooms, whether they're working with their child or just listening in. And it's important that we keep that window open for families to be partners in their child's education. So would you mind sharing a little bit about how do we even get started with building that relationship with the families of our students?
Well, and it's so true what you're saying, dealing with and working with. And,
Mm-hmm.
it's true that families of our students are their first teachers. And we need to remember that their job's not over just because that child is in our classroom now. So children will continue to learn valuable things from their families the rest of their lives. And we want to collaborate with those family members about best practices for the students, just like you would with last year's teacher.
Right.
You go to last year's teacher and you say, what can you tell me about this child? What do I need to know
You're
so
right.
that I can be successful? Well, we need to do the same thing with families. What can you tell me about your child? What do I need to know so that I can be successful? They hold the key
Mm-hmm.
to valuable information, just like you hold the key to valuable information about continuing that educational journey. And we want to let families know we see their value. Once you show them, it's a mutual respect.
Yes. Yes.
Once you show them that, so often part of the reason that families hang back is that they may have had a bad experience with school.
Mm.
Their history with the school system may be a negative one.
Mm-hmm.
And it's your job then to break that barrier down and let them see that that's not what their experience with you is going to be.
Right. Right. That's interesting when we think about kind of walking in the shoes of the families. They may have had a bad experience, and that could be why they hang back or why they're not as involved as other parents are or other families are in the classroom. One piece of advice that I try to give my student teachers before they graduate is during that first week of school or the first 3 days of school is to make contact with the families of every student that you teach, just with a notice of something positive. Like, I am noticing that your child, and share something positive to start that year off on that positive note, on the right foot, so to speak. So that way, if and when a problem occurs, your first interaction with a family member isn't bringing a problem to their attention.
Absolutely. That is so important. And I would add to that pictures, not just notes, but pictures.
Ooh.
Take pictures of their child in the classroom, smiling. I mean, not posed smiling.
Right.
You know they're going to be smiling. They're in your classroom and you're doing such wonderful things with them. Take pictures of them interacting with other students. Take pictures of them having successes. Families love to have that because they're not there to see it. They have to just imagine what's going on in your world. So bring them in.
I love that. And that's another way to keep that window open.
Yes, absolutely.
So, Diane, would you mind sharing, the benefits of working with families as co-collaborators, as partners in education? What are some other benefits? How can families help teachers? And why is this important for our new teachers to consider when they're starting their first year?
So, again, going back to that family has important knowledge about that child and their community that it's extremely valuable for you as a teacher. So, from that family, you can get detailed information about the child's learning habits, their interests, their early development, which is so important, struggles and challenges they have, things that set them off, and talents that they have, and talents that people in the family have. This is all so important, not only to understand that child, but then to help that child as the year goes on. What do you mean you can't think of anything to write about? Doesn't your grandpa play the violin?
There
What
you
do you
go.
mean? Right? There's so many things that once you know the family and that child knows, when a student knows that you see them and you know things about them, they see you as someone who actually cares about them and the things they care about. And it opens up a whole new world
Right.
for you and that student.
Oh, I like that. And that example was excellent. That was a fantastic example.
I always keep a notebook and I write down that information. I make phone calls to parents before school starts and I get as much information as I can from them. And if I haven't gotten enough, then I send out a little interest inventory paper and I add to it. And as the year goes on, as they share little tidbits, I go back into my notebook and I have a page for every kid and I add those things so that later in the year when conflicts arise or I don't know what to write about or, I'm not sure, if I'm worthy or whatever happens to come up, you can go back and look through and say, listen, look at all these amazing things that you and your family have done. You are so worthy and you have so much to talk about. Your life is amazing.
I love that. I just got chills, Diane. That's a great, I
Oh.
love that strategy. Would you mind sharing a couple of other strategies that you have up your sleeve to work with families that our new teachers can implement?
So, here's one thing that I really, really want to drive home. it's important. It's really, really important to to not necessarily change, but to think about your core beliefs about families. So it's important to acknowledge and validate the fact that all families have dreams for their children and they want the best for them. Do not let family patterns and behaviors make you think otherwise. So when a family isn't engaging in their child's education, that, that family, so often you hear teachers talk and they're like, well, that family never comes to open house. They never answer any of the notes I send. They never send book fair money, and they're never here to pick up their child. Their child has to walk home. Instead of immediately believing that that family doesn't care, you really need to stop and think about the struggles that family may be facing that are preventing them from taking on a more active role in their child's education. You have to consider things like poverty, things like depression, mental health issues, housing problems, unemployment, a history of bad relationships with the school, lack of transportation. Are there 6 other kids at home? Are they taking care of an elderly grandparent and they can't leave the house? It's not for us to judge that, but every child is somebody's most prized possession. And just because they don't show that in the same way your parents showed it, doesn't mean they don't love that child fiercely and want the best for them.
That is such an important point to drive home, because as you were speaking and you would share, just because of family patterns or history does not mean that the family does not have dreams and goals for that child. That's such an important point to drive home.
And so often, many, many times I would get students who, the previous teacher and the principal would say, oh, this parent, it's a nightmare. And I didn't have those problems. And I would sit back and I would think, why? What was the difference? Well, I contacted them immediately. I provided my phone number. I provided my information. I talked to them like an equal. And I said, listen, you tell me, you know more about your child than I do. You tell me where we need to go, because we want big things for this child, you and I together. I just think you need to treat everybody as a human.
Right.
And that's going to make all the difference. The other thing is, you as the teacher have to take it upon yourself to reach out to the families and be persistent. They are not, you can't sit back and say, well, they don't show up. They don't. No, they see that as your job. They don't know how to do that. They're raising their family. And right now during a pandemic, it's scary and it's hard. And they didn't go to school for education. They don't know what you know.
As you're sharing this, and you had mentioned that it's your job as the teacher to take that first step, to reach out, to make that connection, because you're right. They're raising their family. They're in the midst of it with, you don't know their background story. So it's so important to make that first connection with the families and with the parents. You had mentioned earlier an interest survey.
Yes.
An interest survey. Would you mind sharing a little bit about, are there questions that are specifically for family members? And did you have questions specific for the families to answer in that interest survey?
So, and again, before I even answer that, I want to go back when we're talking about, this is such an important thing to remember. So we keep saying families, and I want to drive that home as well. Remember when you're talking to your students, don't say parents, because so often it's not parents that are raising, it may not be their parents, and it may just be one parent, or it may be their grandparents, it may be aunts and uncles. And so it's very important to get in the habit of saying your families or your grown-ups, because in many, many situations, entire families are stakeholders in that child's education. So you want to include everybody in that. You don't want to exclude, and not because you're excluding them like, that's a bad thing, but you want to let that child realize that, you want me to tell my whole family about this open house. Everybody's invited. Yes, everybody's invited. Everybody that's a part of you, we want them to be there if they want to be there. As far as the interest survey, so, it would be things like, what are your goals for your child? What, how do you see this year going? What are the struggles that you see your child facing? How does your child behave at home? Is that different do you see that as being different from other places? What are your concerns? So, and then I do leave a huge section on the interest inventory that just says, pour your heart out to me. What do you think I need to know to have a successful year with your child? And I'm telling you, I get pages and pages, and those are my favorite, because, you can tell that in particular, sometimes I'll get parents that say, nope, I have no concerns. And again, I don't judge that. That's their answer. But then this is an opportunity for the kind of parent who is very anxious and very nervous about sending their child to school. And this is their opportunity to say, oh my gosh, she wants to hear how I feel about this. As a mother, I would have loved that. I would have wrote 42 pages. It just, and the other thing too, as a mom, I always, as a teacher, I sent out postcards to the kids. I sent out letters to the parents before school started. I made phone calls to the kids before school started, phone calls to the parents. And my kids never had that. And I always felt so sad for them, because they would watch me talking to those kids and talking to those families, and they would say, Mom, I really wish that my teacher would do that.
Diane, this has been, this podcast episode is only like 25 minutes long, but there are so many gems and strategies that I weave throughout our conversation. I know I'm going to have to go into the show notes and, bullet point a couple of these for our new teachers to reference, because you've dropped so many amazing ideas. And just even if they take one simple thing away, it would be to start using the word families instead of parents or mom and dad, or so using words like families. And I think that is one of the most critical pieces from today's episode for me to share with my new teachers. Now, Diane, how can my audience get in touch with you? How can they connect with you and learn more about what you're doing to help support new teachers and your new endeavors in education?
Okay, so you can find me on Instagram at One Giggle.
That's a great name, by the way.
Thank you so much. And I have a blog, which is Spreading Joy One Giggle at a Time. And my TPT store is One Giggle at a Time.
Perfect. And I'll make sure I link to that in the show notes. Diane, thank you so much for your time this morning. This has been such a wonderful episode full of actionable things that our new teachers can do to connect with the families of their students, no matter if they teach little ones all the way up through 12th grade.
Well, it was such an honor to get to meet with you today. And thank you so much for this opportunity.
have it, EduMagicians. If you enjoyed this episode, please subscribe and share it with your friends. For more EduMagic, check out sfessage.com and follow Dr. Sam on Twitter and Instagram @sfessage. Until next time, you have the EduMagic within you.